In the summer of 1938, 9 men raced motorcycles around a half-mile dirt track in a ranching town in western South Dakota. 175 people came to watch. The man who organized it crashed his own bike through a wall of burning pine boards on purpose for the entertainment of the crowd, and everyone went home happy. Last year, that same event drew the better part of 750,000 people. It generated around $800 million. There were concerts with national headliners, corporate sponsorship deals, branded merchandise, a federal lawsuit over who owned the name, and a small army of vendors selling everything a person could imagine. By every number you could put on a page, the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally is bigger, richer, and more famous than it has ever been in its entire history. And the men who were there at the beginning, the ones who knew what it was for, will tell you it died a long time ago. This is the story of how the greatest motorcycle rally in America became the biggest motorcycle rally in America and lost the only thing that ever made it worth the ride. This is the real history of Sturgis. To understand how something this big could die while it was still growing, you have to go all the way back, past the concerts, past the money, past the crowds, to a man, a borrowed handful of dollars, and a garage in a town almost nobody had heard of. The town is Sturgis, South Dakota. It sits in the shadow of Bear Butte on the northern edge of the Black Hills, and it was named after a Civil War general most of the people who go there every August have never heard of. In the middle of the 1930s, it was a quiet place. The Great Depression had hollowed out rural America, and a small town in western South Dakota was about as far from the center of the world as you could get and still be in it. There was a man living there named Clarence Hoel. Everybody called him Pappy. He had grown up on a family ranch, and he had fallen in love with motorcycles as a teenager, using one to drive cattle and ride fence lines across the property. His family had run an ice business, cutting and selling ice in the days before the refrigerator. Pappy was sharp enough to see where that was going. Once a machine in every kitchen could make its own ice, a man who sold ice was a man with a dying trade. He had a wife, Pearl, and a young son, and he needed a future that was not melting. So in 1936, he made a bet. He applied for a franchise from the Indian Motorcycle Company, at the time the great American name in motorcycles, the brand that defined the whole idea of an American machine. He did not have the money to do it. The story passed down in Sturgis is that he borrowed it, and that one of the men he borrowed it from turned around and bought a motorcycle from him. That was the kind of place it was. That was the kind of man he was. He opened his dealership in his own garage on Junction Avenue. And almost immediately, something started to gather around it. It was not just the bikes. It was Pappy. People were drawn to him, to his energy, his generosity, his appetite for anything fast and a little bit dangerous. Local riders started showing up at the shop, buying Indians, buying parts, hanging around to talk. And later that same year, that loose group of enthusiasts made themselves official. They chartered a motorcycle club. They went through a list of names. The early club minutes record that they considered calling themselves the Bearcats and the Coyotes before they landed on the one that stuck, the Jackpine Gypsies. There were 13 charter members. Pappy Hoel was the oldest of them, and that is where the nickname came from. The younger men started calling him Pappy, and it followed him for the rest of his life and beyond it. You have to understand what a motorcycle club meant in 1936, because it is the exact opposite of what the words would come to mean later. There were no colors in the menacing sense, no territory, no criminal reputation. The Jackpine Gypsies rode Indians, mostly, out of loyalty to Pappy's shop. Over in Rapid City, there was another club, the Rapid City Club, and they rode Harleys. And the two of them had a rivalry, a friendly one, the kind of rivalry that exists between two groups of men who actually like each other and just happen to disagree about whose engine is better. That rivalry is where the racing started. The two clubs would meet up and race each other, first on an old horse track in Rapid City. And then the Gypsies invited the Rapid City riders out to Sturgis, to an old half-mile track at the Meade County Fairgrounds, a track that had been built for horses and then converted for automobiles. And the riders discovered something. The banking on the corners, left over from the car conversion, let them carry far more speed than they could anywhere else. The Sturgis track was fast, it was thrilling, and people who watched it wanted to watch it again. The local businessmen noticed. This is post-Depression rural America, remember? Any event that could draw a crowd, that could put money in the till of a small-town store, was worth paying attention to. The Sturgis Commercial Club, the town's business association, saw what was happening at those races and decided to organize something bigger. They formed a body called the Black Hills Motor Classic, and they set out to put on a proper event with prize money to attract real racers, with a parade, a street dance, a carnival, and stunts. There was friction in that from the very first day, and it matters because it's the seed of everything that comes later. Membership in the Black Hills Motor Classic, the business organization, was limited to business owners. The Jackpine Gypsies, the actual riders, the men who lived and breathed the thing, weren't automatically part of the body that would run it. There were hard feelings about that. From the very beginning, there were two Sturgises, the riders, and the people who saw the riders as a revenue opportunity. The only reason it held together at all in those early years was that Pappy Hoel happened to be both. He owned a business, and he led the club. He stood in the gap between the two worlds, and as long as he was alive, he kept them from pulling apart. Hold on to that, because one day he would not be there to hold the gap. August 14th, 1938. The first Black Hills Motor Classic. The main event was a half-mile race on the dirt. There were 9 riders. 8 of them were on Indians. 1 was on a Harley. The purse was $500, which was real money in 1938, enough to pull in serious competitors from outside the area. A young racer named Johnny Spiegelhoff, who had been invited up after a hill climb in Minnesota, took the championship, and he had come back and won it again, more than once, in the years that followed. The crowd that came to watch numbered around 175 people. Sit with that number for a second, because it is the whole story in miniature. 175 people. You could fit them in a high school gym. You could learn most of their names by the end of the weekend. The thing that would one day swallow an entire region every August and turn a town of 7,000 into a temporary city of 500,000, it began as a gathering small enough that everyone there could see everyone else. And it was personal. This wasn't a corporation putting on a show for strangers. When the riders came to town, they camped in Pappy Hoel's backyard. His wife Pearl cooked for them. The detail that comes down through every honest account of those early years is that she made them beans and weenies, fed them out of her own kitchen, and treated a yard full of motorcycle racers like family. Pearl ran the other half of the event too, the Gypsy Tour, a guided ride through the Black Hills and Custer State Park with a picnic lunch at the State Game Lodge. While the men raced, she drove the chase vehicle, going out to pick up riders who had broken down on the side of the road. One year, the story goes, she gave away the family's leftover tea to a stranded tourist whose Ford had overheated on the Needles Highway. That is what Sturgis was. It was a man who loved motorcycles, his wife who fed everyone, a club of friends, a fast track, and a few hundred people who came because they loved the same thing. The racing was the center of it, but the racing wasn't really the point. The point was the gathering. The point was that for one weekend in August, the people who understood this strange, loud, slightly dangerous thing could be in one place together and not have to explain themselves to anybody. The stunts tell you everything about the spirit of it. Pappy didn't just organize the event, he performed in it. He called his stunts tricks, fun, and foolishness. His specialty was riding a motorcycle straight through a wall of burning boards. Another favorite was crashing into an outhouse that had been set on fire. This was a grown man, a respected local business owner, deliberately wrecking his own motorcycle into flaming structures because it made a crowd of his neighbors laugh and cheer. There was no sponsor for that. There was no merchandising opportunity in it. He did it because it was fun, and because these were his people, and that was reason enough. It worked. It was small, but it worked. Worked well enough that Pappy decided to do it again. The next year, the Gypsy Tour alone drew dozens of riders out through Mount Rushmore and the Needles Highway and Sylvan Lake. By 1940, around 3,000 people were coming to Sturgis for it. That was the year they printed the first souvenir t-shirts, all of them maroon, which is a small thing, but it's worth marking because it's the first time anyone made a physical object whose only purpose was to say, "I was there." The first little hint that this was becoming something people wanted to belong to. And then the world stopped it. The United States went to war. Gasoline was rationed. You could not, in good conscience or by law, burn fuel racing motorcycles for fun while the country was pouring every drop it had into the war effort. The Jackpine Gypsies canceled the rally. For several years in the early 1940s, there was no Black Hills Motor Classic at all. The track sat quiet. The garage on Junction Avenue kept its lights on, but the gathering that had started to grow around it was put on hold while a generation of the young men who would have been racing went overseas instead. When the war ended and they came home, the rally came back with them. And here's a small wrinkle that tells you something about the character of the place. When they restarted it in 1946, they decided to count the years they'd missed. They went back and counted an informal gathering from 1937, and they counted the war years so that the numbering would line up. It's the reason the anniversary math has always seemed slightly off. The reason the 75th anniversary fell in 2015, even though the first official rally was in 1938. They didn't want to lose the years. Even the bookkeeping was sentimental. They were a club that would rather fudge a number than admit there'd been a year without Sturgis in it. The decades after the war are the years almost nobody tells stories about, and they might be the most important years of all, because they are the years Sturgis was exactly what it was supposed to be, and growing at a pace slow enough that it never lost the thread. In 1949, for the first time, the town blocked off a section of Main Street, not for a party, but for an award ceremony to honor the racers. Think about the order of operations there. The first time Sturgis closed its main street, it did it to give out trophies. The racing was still the heart of the thing. A few years later, they started closing the street for motorcycle parking, just one block at first. Today, it is 6. But it started with one block and a trophy. The event kept adding to itself, slowly, organically, the way a thing grows when the people running it actually love it. In 1961, the Jackpine Gypsies introduced hill climbs and motocross, riders dragging their machines up impossible grades, and the wild, churning chaos of off-road racing. These were not marketing additions. They were the things the club members themselves wanted to do. The event expanded because the riders' appetites expanded, not because a board of directors found a new revenue line. By the mid-1960s, it had stretched from a weekend to 3 days, then to 5. For the 25th anniversary, in the mid-1960s, attendance hit around 2,500 people, a record at the time, and a number that, today, would not fill a fraction of a single Buffalo Chip concert. But in its moment, 2,500 people was enormous. It was proof that the thing Pappy started in his backyard had become a genuine institution, a fixed point on the calendar for motorcycle people across the upper Midwest and beyond. And it stayed personal. The men who organized it were the men who rode in it. The Jackpine Gypsies owned the land. They still do. The tracks, the hill climb, the field areas, the clubhouse. It wasn't leased from a corporation or run by a promoter flown in from somewhere else. It was owned and operated by a non-profit club of riders who put their profits back into the community, into local charities, the food bank, the high school. The rally made money, but the money was a means, not the end. The end was the gathering. The end was August, and the Black Hills, and the sound of engines, and the faces you only saw once a year. This is the Sturgis that lives in the memory of the men who are old now. The Sturgis you reach for when you say it used to be real. It was a place where, if your bike broke down, the guy who stopped to help you might be the same guy you'd been racing an hour before. Where the campsite was somebody's backyard or a patch of the city park, and the entertainment was each other. Where the whole thing ran on a kind of trust that does not survive contact with 500,000 strangers. If that's the version of riding you grew up with, the version where the people mattered more than the spectacle, then this channel is built for you. And the films we make here are built to keep that history honest, the way it actually happened, without the gloss. If you want more of it, take a second right now and subscribe. Because the next part of this story is the part where it all starts to change, and you're going to want to be here for the rest of it. The thing about a golden age is that the people living in it never know that's what it is. The Jackpine Gypsies in the 1960s weren't preserving anything. They were just having a good time, year after year, with no idea that the good time itself was the rare and fragile thing. They couldn't see what was coming, but it was coming. Somewhere in the 1970s, the crowd stopped being a community and started being a mob. Not all at once, but it tipped. In 1974, for the first time, the rally let a temporary vendor set up at the Sturgis Auditorium. One vendor, a modest little thing. But it was the first crack in a wall, because once one person was allowed to sell to the crowd, the logic of the whole event began, slowly, to change. The crowd stopped being only a gathering of participants and started becoming, also, a market. A thing to be sold to. Today, there are hundreds of vendors hawking everything from t-shirts and corn dogs to $100,000 custom bikes. It started with one tent in 1974. For the 35th anniversary, in the mid-1970s, the rally stretched to 7 full days. And the crowds that came were not the crowds of the golden middle. They were bigger, younger, drunker, and a lot of them had not come for the racing at all. They had come for the reputation. By then, the broader culture of American motorcycling had been transformed. not in Sturgis, but everywhere, by the rise of the outlaw biker. You have to understand the wider current Sturgis was floating in. Years earlier, after a rally in Hollister, California got blown out of proportion by the press. The American motorcyclist establishment had tried to defend its riders by saying that 99% of motorcyclists were decent, law-abiding people, and that only 1% caused trouble. It was meant as a defense. Instead, the worst of them seized it like a badge. They called themselves one-percenters. They formed clubs whose names became synonymous with menace, the kind of clubs that wore their colors, traveled in packs, and built their entire identity around being the 1% that the rest of the world was supposed to fear. And those men found Sturgis. Of course they did. It was the biggest gathering of motorcycles in America, in a remote place, with a town too small to control it. By the late 70s and into the 1980s, the rally had a hard edge it had never had before. The official histories, even the friendly ones, list what local law enforcement was dealing with: public nudity, open drunkenness, gunfire, and fights between rival motorcycle gangs. The beans and weenies in the backyard rally, the one Pappy Hoel used to cook for, now needed a serious police presence just to keep the lid on. The town began licensing vendors to try to impose some order on the commercial chaos. And the attendance numbers climbed past anything the founders could have imagined. 30,000 by the end of the 1970s. And then, in 1980, a record 40,000 people descended on a town of a few thousand residents. For the people who actually lived in Sturgis, 40,000 was the breaking point. These were not all the racing fans of the old days. A lot of them were a different crowd entirely, and the residents had had enough. The behavior, the noise, the lawlessness, the sense that their own town had been taken away from them for a week every August. It boiled over into something that, if it had gone the other way, would have ended the Sturgis rally forever. In 1981, the citizens of Sturgis voted on whether to kill it. There was a citywide referendum. The question, in effect, was whether the town should stop hosting the thing Pappy Hoel had built, whether to pull the support that made it possible and let it die. And the vote was close. Heartbreakingly, decisively close. The referendum to end the Sturgis rally was defeated by roughly 1%. 1%. The same fraction that had become the symbol of the outlaw biker was, by coincidence, almost exactly the margin by which the rally survived its own hometown's attempt to bury it. If a few dozen more people in Sturgis had voted the other way, the largest motorcycle rally in the world would have ended in 1981, and the word Sturgis would mean nothing today. It survived. But the town kept pushing back. The next year there was another referendum, this one to strip away municipal services, to stop providing parking on Main Street, to pull back law enforcement, to end camping in the city park. The city attorney had to point out that none of it could actually stop the rally, because the rally was run by private groups on private land. The Jackpine Gypsies owned their tracks. Nobody could vote the rally out of existence as long as the riders themselves wanted it to exist. And in 1983, the city did close the park to camping after attendees set a string of bonfires, the final straw for a town that had spent a decade watching its public spaces get torched. So here is the strange, important truth about the first death of Sturgis. The thing that nearly killed it was not decline. It was success. It was growth. It was the rally getting so big, so fast, and attracting a crowd so far removed from the original community of riders that the town that gave birth to it tried to strangle it in its crib. The danger never came from too few people caring. It came from too many of the wrong kind of attention. And that is a pattern you are about to watch repeat on a scale 1,000 times larger, with no town vote that can save it. In 1989, Clarence Pappy Hoel died. He was 85 years old. Try to measure what left the world with him. He was the man who borrowed money to buy an Indian franchise in the depth of the Depression. He was the man who crashed his motorcycle through burning walls to make his neighbors laugh. He was the founder, the patriarch, the oldest of the 13, the one whose nickname the whole thing carried. But more than any of that, he was the bridge. He was the one human being who had always stood in the gap between the riders and the businessmen, between the soul of the thing and the money of the thing, and held them together by the simple fact of being both at once. For more than 50 years, Sturgis had a center of gravity. It had a man at the middle of it who remembered what it was for. And in 1989, that man was gone. The exact attendance the year he died is one of those numbers the histories disagree about, and we're not going to pretend to certainty we don't have. Some accounts put it near 100,000, others much higher. But here's what nobody disagrees about. The year after Pappy Hoel died, the dam broke. 1990 was the 50th anniversary. And it was not a rally anymore. It was a phenomenon. The crowd that came to the Black Hills that summer numbered in the hundreds of thousands. By the most cited figure, around 400,000 people, which in a single stroke made it the largest tourist event in the history of the state of South Dakota. The town of a few thousand was outnumbered by visitors at a ratio that one historian put at 57-1. The claim from that year that got repeated everywhere was that more than half of all the Harley-Davidsons in the entire United States were at Sturgis that week. One attendee did the arithmetic and said that if you lined the bikes up single file, they'd form a parade over 1,000 miles long. The distance from Kansas City to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Whether or not every one of those numbers is exact, the meaning is exact. The year the founder died, Sturgis stopped being a gathering and became a destination. The following year, they even gave it a new official name, the Sturgis Rally and Races, though everyone had been calling it simply Sturgis for decades. And into the vacuum where Pappy used to stand, something rushed in. Not a person, money. Because 400,000 people is not a community. 400,000 people is an economy. You cannot feed them beans and weenies out of your kitchen. You cannot pick them up off the side of the road in your chase vehicle. You cannot learn their names. 400,000 people need hotels and campgrounds and food vendors and beer tents and parking and portable toilets and security and traffic control and entertainment, and every single one of those needs is a business opportunity. And every business opportunity attracts someone whose relationship to motorcycles begins and ends with the wallet of the person riding one. The single clearest symbol of the new era had actually been planted back in 1981, the same year the town tried to vote the rally out of existence. A man named Rod Woodruff started a campground on land east of Sturgis and called it the Buffalo Chip. And the Buffalo Chip became the engine of the modern rally. Over the years, it grew into something the founders could never have pictured. Not a campground so much as a temporary city with its own stores, its own bars, and an amphitheater hosting 9 straight days of major concerts. The headliners that have played the Buffalo Chip read like a classic rock festival bill. Aerosmith, Def Leppard, Ozzy Osbourne, Stevie Nicks, Willie Nelson. On one August night, Bob Dylan and Kid Rock played back-to-back. The place would eventually try to incorporate as a town of its own. Now, there's nothing evil about a concert. There's nothing wrong with a man building a business that gives people a good time. But notice what's happened to the center of gravity. In 1938, the center of Sturgis was a half-mile dirt track and 9 racers. By the 1990s and 2000s, for a huge share of the people coming, the center of Sturgis was a concert stage with a national act on it and a ticket price to match. The motorcycles were still there, but they were becoming the backdrop. They were becoming the theme of the party rather than the reason for it. The racing, the actual thing, the competition that the whole event had been built to showcase, the reason Pappy sought AMA sanctioning in the first place, the reason they closed Main Street in 1949 to hand out trophies. The racing became a footnote, a sideshow. Something that still technically happened. Out at the tracks the Jackpine Gypsies still owned, while the real crowd, the hundreds of thousands, flowed toward the concerts and the bars and the vendors and the spectacle. The king was dead, and the kingdom had been inherited by the cash register. I want to be straight with you about why this channel exists, right here at the hinge of the story. There are 100 places that'll give you the glossy version of Sturgis, the sponsored, sanded down, everything is wonderful version. What we do here is tell it the way the people who lived it actually remember it, with the facts checked and the hard parts left in. If that's the kind of history you've been looking for, subscribe and stay with me, because the last chapter, the part where Sturgis becomes a brand, a lawsuit, and finally a national symbol of something nobody expected, is the part that ties this whole thing together. Here is the moment you know for certain that something has changed at the deepest level, the moment people start fighting in federal court over who owns the name. As Sturgis grew into an $800 million machine, the name itself became one of the most valuable things about it. The word Sturgis. The phrase Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, Sturgis Rally, and Races. An organization tied to the local Chamber of Commerce moved to trademark those words and license them to control who could put Sturgis on a t-shirt, a patch, a bottle, a poster, and to collect a fee from everyone who did. That licensing operation generated millions of dollars in royalties and sponsorship. Stop and feel the strangeness of that. A word that started as the name of a small ranching town, named after a general nobody remembers, had become intellectual property. The name of Pappy Hoel's backyard gathering was now an asset to be enforced, with lawyers, against anyone who used it without paying. The thing that had been built on a handshake economy, where a man would lend you the money to buy a motorcycle and then buy a motorcycle from you, was now a thing where you could be sued for printing the wrong word on a shirt. It went to federal court. And in December of 2019, a federal judge ruled that the organization could no longer claim ownership of Sturgis, Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, or Sturgis Rally and Races. He ordered the trademarks canceled. The court effectively put the name back into the public domain, which is to say, the court ruled that Sturgis belongs to everyone, to the motorcycle community at large, and to no single corporation. You could read that as a victory. The people's name returned to the people. But step back and look at what it really tells you. We had reached a point in the life of this thing where its own identity had to be liberated by a judge. The name had been captured so thoroughly by the commercial machinery that it took a federal court order to pry it loose. That is not the story of a backyard cookout. That is the story of an industry, and the industry kept industrializing. In 2016, the city formally expanded the event to a 10-day format. 10 days. The thing that had once been a weekend, then 3 days, then 5, then 7, was now a 10-day commercial season. beginning on the first Friday in August and running through the second Sunday. A span calibrated not to the rhythm of a club of friends, but to the maximization of visitor days and vendor revenue. The peak of the whole machine came in 2015, the 75th anniversary. The crowd that year was the largest in the rally's history, by the most cited estimate, around 739,000 people, with some counts running even higher. It was, by the numbers, the most successful Sturgis that had ever happened. 750,000 people. Roughly $2.5 million in tax revenue for the state in that year alone. It was also, by another measure, the deadliest. That same 75th anniversary saw the highest number of motorcycle fatalities of any rally. 15 people died. The biggest year was the bloodiest year. The sheer scale that made it a triumph on the spreadsheet also made it more dangerous on the road than it had ever been. Both of those things were true at the same time, and they were true because of the same thing: the size. And there's a detail from the modern rally that more than any attendance figure tells you what's happened to the soul of it. By recent counts, something close to 40% of the people who come to Sturgis now don't ride there. They tow their motorcycles, load them onto a trailer, drive them across the country behind a truck or an RV, and unload them for the last few miles into town so they can ride down Main Street and be seen. That share has climbed steadily over the years. Think about what that means against the origin of this thing. Sturgis began as a gypsy tour, a ride. The whole point was the journey, the road, the act of riding a motorcycle through the Black Hills. Pappy Hoel drove a chase vehicle to rescue people whose bikes broke down on the way, because getting there under your own power, on two wheels, was the entire experience. And now, 4 out of 10 people put the bike on a trailer. The ride, the literal original meaning of the event, has become optional. For a huge share of attendees, the motorcycle isn't transportation anymore. It's a prop you bring to the photo. The machine works perfectly. It just doesn't mean what it used to. And then came 2020, when the world shut down, and Sturgis became something nobody had ever asked it to be: a symbol. In the spring and summer of that year, a pandemic swept the planet. Across the United States, gatherings of more than a few dozen people were banned. Concerts were canceled, festivals scrapped, stadiums emptied, entire industries of human assembly simply switched off. The Centers for Disease Control classified large gatherings of travelers as the highest risk activity for spreading the virus. Nearly every mass event in America that summer was called off. Sturgis was not. The 80th anniversary went ahead in August of 2020, in the middle of the worst public health crisis in a century. And it did not go ahead quietly. Roughly 460,000 people came, nearly 500,000, into a town of 7,000 from every corner of the country, with no mask requirement and no real distancing. The Buffalo Chip ran its full slate of concerts. Some of the biggest acts pulled out. Willie Nelson, ZZ Top, and Lynyrd Skynyrd all dropped off the bill, but plenty played on. And one of them, a band whose lead singer stood in front of a packed, maskless crowd, shouted out a line that became, overnight, the defining soundbite of the entire pandemic-era culture war. He told the crowd they were all there together, being human again, and then he cursed the virus by name. The video went everywhere. Sturgis 2020 stopped being a motorcycle rally and became a national Rorschach test. To one half of the country, it was a monument to recklessness, a super spreader event, a crowd of people endangering everyone they would go home to. researchers produced a study estimating the rally might have driven 250,000 coronavirus cases nationwide and tens of billions of dollars in health costs. To the other half of the country, it was a monument to freedom, proof that some Americans still refused to be told they couldn't gather, couldn't ride, couldn't live. The governor of South Dakota defended it fiercely, framing it as a matter of personal liberty. We're not here to relitigate that fight, and the truth of the numbers was hotly disputed. The headline case estimates were challenged hard by other economists and fact-checkers, and the real figure was almost certainly impossible to pin down. The point for this story is not who was right. The point is what Sturgis had become. An event that began as 9 racers and 175 neighbors, a gathering so intimate that the founder's wife cooked dinner for everyone, had become so enormous, so culturally loaded, so symbolically powerful, that whether or not it happened was now a national news story argued over by epidemiologists and governors. The little backyard cookout had become a thing the whole country had an opinion about. That is one definition of triumph. The rally was so important it could not be canceled even by a pandemic. The institution Pappy Hoel built had become, in a sense, immortal, too big, too distributed, too economically vital, too symbolically charged to die. There was no town vote that could end it now. There was no virus that could stop it. And yet, look at what's happened since the peak. The 75th anniversary in 2015, with its 750,000 people, was the high water mark, and the tide has been going out ever since. In the years after, attendance fell by roughly a third off that peak. The counts bounced and dipped, a strong pandemic-defying year, then softer ones, with traffic into town in some years running double digits below the recent average before recovering again. The rally is still huge. It is still, by a wide margin, the biggest motorcycle gathering in America. But the relentless growth that defined its first 80 years has stopped, and the people whose job it is to keep it alive are openly worried about the one thing that no amount of money can buy. The riders are getting old. That is the quiet crisis underneath all the noise. The core of Sturgis, the heart of the crowd, has always been the generation that grew up when motorcycling was at its cultural peak in America, and that generation is aging out. Year by year, there are fewer of them on the road, and the younger riders aren't replacing them at the same rate. The organizers have started programs to draw in young people, teaching kids to ride balance bikes, partnering with technical schools to build custom motorcycles, setting up rider training sites for beginners, because they can see the demographic cliff coming. They are, in the most literal sense, trying to manufacture the next generation of the community that used to manufacture itself. There's a moment from one recent rally that says it better than any statistic. A reporter was talking with a young girl whose family had brought her to Sturgis. She'd taken a ride through the crowd of motorcycles with her grandfather, and the reporter asked her whether she could see herself coming back to the rally as an adult, on her own. And the girl, looking out at the spectacle that 500,000 people travel across a continent for, could only manage a small, uncertain answer. Maybe. She didn't really like big crowds. Maybe. That's the future of the greatest rally in America. In the mouth of a child. Not a roar, not a certainty. A shrug. So did Sturgis die? You can hold the question up to the light and turn it, and you'll see 2 completely opposite answers, and both of them are true. By every external measure, Sturgis is more alive than it has ever been. It draws 500,000 people in an ordinary year and 750,000 in a great one. It generates $800 million. Its name is so valuable, it took a federal judge to settle who owns it. It is so culturally powerful that it couldn't be stopped by a global pandemic. The 9 racers and the 175 spectators have multiplied into one of the largest recurring human gatherings in the country. By the numbers, Pappy Hoel's backyard cookout conquered the world. That is true. And by every internal measure, by the only measures that ever mattered to the men who built it, Sturgis died somewhere along the way, and it's not coming back. The thing that made it real was that it was small enough to be personal. It was a community of people who loved motorcycles and loved each other, who raced and broke down and got rescued and ate beans in a stranger's backyard and went home with names and faces they'd carry for a year. You cannot do that with 500,000 people. The intimacy that was the entire point could not survive the success. The racing became a footnote. The ride became optional, towed in on a trailer for the last few miles. The name became a trademark. The gathering became a market. The founder died, and no one ever stood in the gap again, and the money rushed into the empty space and never left. That is also true. Both things are true. Sturgis is the biggest it has ever been, and Sturgis is dead. It conquered the world by becoming something the people who created it would no longer recognize. It survived by ceasing to be itself. The patient is thriving. The patient is also gone. And the most honest thing anyone can say about the greatest motorcycle rally in America is that it won. And that winning is exactly how it died. 9 racers on a half-mile dirt track. 175 people who knew each other's names. Pappy Hoel cooking beans and weenies in the backyard. A man riding a motorcycle through a wall of fire because it made his neighbors laugh. One vendor in 1974. A vote lost by 1% that let it live. A funeral in 1989 for the man who held it all together. 400,000 strangers the very next year. A concert stage where the racing used to be. A federal courtroom fighting over a word. 750,000 people. And 15 dead on the road. 40 out of every 100 bikes arriving on a trailer. A little girl asked if she'll ever come back, saying, "Maybe." There's a question buried under all of this. And it's the one I keep coming back to, because it's bigger than motorcycles. When you save something by selling it, when you keep a thing alive by turning it into a product, a brand, a destination, an $800 million machine, at what point have you saved it? And at what point have you just built a very impressive monument on the spot where it used to be? The road into Sturgis is the same road. The Black Hills are the same hills. The name is the same name. The engines still roar down Main Street every August, louder than ever, in numbers Pappy Hoel could never have dreamed of. But everyone he started it with is gone. And the thing they started it for, the smallness, the closeness, the idea that you rode there to be among your own, that left a long time ago, quietly, while the crowd was getting bigger and nobody was counting. So maybe that's the real question this whole story leaves us with. Not whether Sturgis is still standing. It's standing. It's enormous. It'll outlive all of us. The question is how you tell the difference between a thing that's still alive and a thing that's just still open.
In 1970, Sturgis drew 3,500 riders. You camped in the city park for free. The man next to you had ridden from Tulsa on a machine he built himself. Last year, basic tent camping at the same event started at $189 a night. A cheeseburger on Main Street cost $26. 500,000 people showed up. And the man who has lived outside Sturgis for 47 years does not ride during the rally anymore. He is afraid the dentists and lawyers playing biker for a week will take him out. This is not a story about attendance numbers. The attendance is fine. This is the story of what was in that city park in 1970 that is not in the $300 campground in 2025. And the specific decisions made by specific companies in specific years that moved it from one to the other. August 14th, 1938, Sturgis, South Dakota. Population approximately 3,000. Clarence Pappy Hoel owned the Indian motorcycle dealership on Junction Avenue. He was a member of the Jackpine Gypsies motorcycle club, which he had helped found, and he organized the first rally as a racing event. 12 people showed up, not 1,200. 12? Hill climb, half-mile flat track race. A few stunts from trick riders that Hoel had brought out from the professional circuit. That was it. No vendors, no concert stage, no manufacturer demonstration area, no hospitality tents. A dirt track. 12 riders, and the specific American pleasure of watching men go fast on machines they understood completely. Hoel ran the rally every year through the 1940s and into the 1950s. Attendance grew slowly. The post-war years brought veterans home to a country where motorcycles were becoming more affordable, and the open road felt like something that had been earned. By the early 1950s, a few hundred riders were making the trip to Sturgis. By the late 1950s, a few thousand. The Jackpine Gypsies ran everything. The city park was the campground. Admission was free. That model, racing-centered, rider-organized, free to attend, camp where you land, persisted through the 1960s and into the early 1970s, even as the numbers grew. What the event was did not fundamentally change because the people running it were still the people who had founded it, and they were still riders first. Pappy Hoel died in 1989. He was 79 years old. He had seen the rally grow from 12 people to something approaching 100,000. He never saw what it would become in the decade after his death. I personally think that is a mercy. The 1970s Sturgis was not what you have seen in photographs if those photographs came from after 1995. It was not Main Street lined with manufacturer tents. It was not the Buffalo Chip with its concert stage and luxury camping packages. It was not a city grid of vendor booths selling Sturgis-branded merchandise manufactured in facilities that had never heard of E-Twin Run. Here's what it actually was. Attendance in 1970 was approximately 3,500 riders, not 350,000, not 35,000. 3,500. At that scale, the rally was still a community. You could look around at any given moment and feel like you knew the room. Riders who had come from Wyoming knew riders who had come from Minnesota. By the third day, you had heard most of the good stories that were going to be told that year. The campground was the city park. Free. You pulled in, found a patch of grass, unrolled your gear. The man next to you had ridden from Tulsa. The man on the other side had ridden from Colorado. Nobody had trailered their bike. The concept of trailering to a motorcycle rally would have produced genuine incomprehension in 1972, the way bringing a yacht to a swimming meet produces incomprehension now. The point was, the ride. The destination was secondary to getting there. The racing was still the centerpiece. Flat track at the Jackpine Gypsies track. Hill climbing on the surrounding terrain. These were not spectator events in the modern sense. Riders watched because they rode, because the technique on display was directly applicable to what they were trying to do on their own machines. Because watching a skilled flat track rider carry corner speed was a practical education, not an entertainment product. The machines were working machines. The average 1970s Sturgis motorcycle was a Shovelhead that the owner had maintained himself, modified himself, repaired himself on the road when necessary. It was not a showpiece. It was not a lifestyle accessory. It was a machine that the rider had a complete working relationship with. He knew every sound it made and what each sound meant. He had rebuilt the carburetor at least once. He had probably replaced the primary chain and set the timing with a strobe, adjusted the valves, and solved 3 problems that the manual did not acknowledge existed. The bar was the last chance saloon. A few other establishments, beer at a price that did not require the rider to assess his remaining cash before ordering. The specific social texture of a place where everyone is there for the same reason and nobody has to explain themselves. You are a rider. The man next to you was a rider. The credential was the machine outside and the miles you had put on it getting here. There was no corporate presence because there was nothing for corporations to attach to. Harley-Davidson did not have a demonstration area. No gear manufacturers had booths. No insurance companies had tents. No energy drink companies existed. The event had not yet developed the critical mass of eyeballs that made it worth the investment of a corporate marketing budget. What it had instead was authenticity of a kind that cannot be manufactured or purchased or themed into existence. 1,200 miles of riding through the Midwest to get here. A machine you understood completely. Men who had made the same journey by the same means for the same reason. The Black Hills spreading in every direction with roads that were empty enough to be genuinely yours. That is what your buddies went to in the 90s. That is what the 47-year rider outside Sturgis remembers when he says the soul is gone. Not a specific experience, a specific relationship between the people and the place and the machines that could only exist when the scale was small enough for the community to recognize itself. The 1980s Sturgis was the last iteration of the rally that most of the riders who rode in the 1970s would recognize as the same event. The numbers had grown, and by the mid-1980s, attendance was in the 30,000 to 50,000 range, but the fundamental character was still intact in a way that would not survive the decade that followed. The Buffalo Chip Campground opened in 1981. Rod and Terry Woodruff purchased a parcel of land on the outskirts of Sturgis and began running it as a private campground for rally attendees. In the early years, the Buffalo Chip was simply a field with a bar, a stage, and a reasonable nightly rate. The atmosphere was authentic because the people in it were authentic. Riders who had gotten there under their own power, camping in a field, drinking at a bar, watching local bands play without any particular commercial agenda attached to the evening. By the mid-1980s, the Buffalo Chip had developed its own identity as the rowdier alternative to Main Street. The concert lineups began to improve as the event's scale made it financially viable to book recognizable acts. The camping fee was still accessible. In 1985, you could stay at the Buffalo Chip for $20 a night and bring your own beer, the field, the bar, the fire, the bikes outside. The specific quality of a summer night in the Black Hills, with the temperature dropping after dark and the sound of V-twins arriving and departing at intervals throughout the evening. The 1983 Harley-Davidson management buyout changed the economic relationship between the rally and the manufacturer in ways that took years to fully manifest. When the 13 executives bought the company back from AMF, they inherited a brand that had been badly damaged by years of quality problems. The specific strategy they pursued, repositioning Harley from a working-class transportation machine to a premium lifestyle product, began in 1983 and accelerated through the 1980s as the quality improvements made the machines more reliable and the marketing investment made the brand more aspirational. Sturgis was central to that repositioning strategy. The rally was the most concentrated audience of Harley riders in America. It was the place where the brand's relationship with its customers was on fullest display. As Harley's corporate sophistication grew through the late 1980s, the manufacturer's presence at the rally grew with it. There were not yet corporate tents and demonstration rides in 1985, but the seeds were planted. The rally that had been organized by the Jackpine Gypsies for riders was beginning to attract the attention of the industry that served riders, and that attention would eventually transform the event in ways that neither the Jackpine Gypsies nor the riders they served had any mechanism to resist. The pivot year that most riders who were there identify is somewhere between 1988 and 1992. The specific moment varies depending on who you ask and when they stopped going. Some say the 1990 rally, the 50th anniversary, a massive attendance spike, the first year when the event felt genuinely overrun rather than simply arch. Some say 1992, when the manufacturer presence became impossible to ignore. Some say 1995, when the commercial infrastructure had grown to the point where finding the grassroots culture required deliberate navigation rather than simply showing up. But they all agree on what was lost. Not the riding. The Black Hills still ride the same way they rode in 1972. Not the machines. A Shovelhead in the Black Hills in 2026 makes the same sound it made in 1972 and demands the same relationship from its rider. What was lost was the specific community of self-selected people who had arrived under their own power for the same reason and recognized each other because of it. That community did not disappear. It dispersed into smaller gatherings that the national motorcycle press does not cover and the corporate marketing departments have not yet found. The term rich urban biker entered the motorcycle press in the early 1990s, and it named something real. The specific cultural phenomenon it described was the result of Harley-Davidson's deliberate repositioning strategy, intersecting with the disposable income of the baby boomer generation as that generation entered its peak earning years. A Harley-Davidson in 1972 cost $1,995 and was purchased by men who worked in factories, mills, and mines. A Harley-Davidson in 1995 cost $12,000 to $16,000 and was increasingly purchased by men who worked in law offices, medical practices, and financial services. The machine was the same in outline: American iron, V-twin, recognizable silhouette. The cultural context was entirely different. Harley understood this demographic shift and accelerated it. The HOG, Harley Owners Group, was founded in 1983 with 33 members. By 1990, it had 200,000. By 2000, it had 1 million. HOG chapters organized group rides. They created community around the brand. They gave people who had purchased a Harley as a lifestyle choice the social infrastructure that had previously existed only for people who had been riding since before the concept of lifestyle choice was attached to motorcycle ownership. The HOG brought new riders to Sturgis in significant numbers through the late 1980s and especially the 1990s. And the HOG rider arriving at Sturgis was a different person from the rider who had been coming since the 1970s. Not worse. Not better. Different. He had more money. He was less likely to have maintained his own machine. He was more likely to have trailered his bike part of the way or all of the way. He was there for the experience of Sturgis rather than for the experience of riding to Sturgis. And the specific distinction between those two motivations, which seems subtle in description, produced an entirely different event when multiplied by tens of thousands of people. The infrastructure expanded to serve the new demographic. Hotels appeared and filled. The Buffalo Chips camping fee rose as demand increased, and the amenities expanded to justify the price. The concert lineup professionalized, not local bands on a Saturday night, but ZZ Top, Kid Rock, the kind of national acts whose booking fees required a revenue model sophisticated enough to guarantee payment. Vendors multiplied because the new demographic had disposable income and shopping appetite that the 1970s rider, who had packed everything he needed in a saddlebag, had never provided. Main Street became a commercial corridor, not primarily because of corporate cynicism, though that came, but because the event had grown large enough that the commercial infrastructure was genuinely necessary to serve the population that arrived. A gathering of 3,500 riders in 1970 could be served by a few bars and a gas station. A gathering of 500,000 people in 2000 required hotels, restaurants, campgrounds, medical facilities, law enforcement, and yes, corporate sponsors whose investment funded the infrastructure that made the scale possible. The specific irony that the comment section of the TJ Brutal Customs video is working through without quite naming it directly is this: the corporate commercial transformation of Sturgis was not something that happened to the rally against the wishes of the riders. It happened because the riders changed. The men who came to Sturgis in the 1990s and the 2000s in hog vests with their bikes on flatbeds created the demand that the commercial infrastructure was built to serve. The $26 cheeseburger and the $300 camping fee and the manufacturer tents and the advertisements scorching your eyes at every turn, those things exist because a sufficient number of people were willing to pay for them. The riders who built Sturgis in the 1970s were not willing to pay for them. They were not willing to pay for them because the point was never the event. The point was the ride. The event was just what happened after you arrived. The TJ Brutal Customs video that sparked this conversation made a reasonable point. If you measure Sturgis by attendance, it is not dying. The 20-year attendance graph shows growth, not collapse. The 2025 rally drew somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people. That is not a dying event by any objective measure. But attendance is the wrong measurement for what the 47-year rider outside Sturgis is mourning. He's not mourning the absence of people. He's mourning the absence of a specific kind of people. The dentists and lawyers playing biker for a week that he mentions are, by attendance metrics, exactly what Sturgis needs. They fill the campgrounds. They buy the merchandise. They generate $800 million in economic activity that the South Dakota economy depends on for the summer. They are also the reason he does not ride during the rally. The distinction between the Sturgis that existed in the 1970s and the Sturgis that exists today is not a distinction that attendance numbers capture. It is a distinction about why people come and what they bring with them when they do. In 1972, a man rode to Sturgis because he was a rider, and this was where riders went. In 2025, a man rides to Sturgis, or trailers to Sturgis, or flies to Sturgis and rents a bike, because Sturgis is an experience product that he has decided to consume. The experience is real. The Black Hills are beautiful, the roads are excellent, the machinery on display is genuinely impressive. The culture, for those who know where to find it and what to look for, still exists in pockets. But the organizing principle of the event has changed from a community of self-selected riders gathering around a common identity to a commercial event that serves a broad demographic by offering motorcycle-adjacent experiences at prices calibrated to what that demographic will pay. That change is not reversible. Not because no one wants to reverse it, but because the economic infrastructure that now supports the event, the hotels, the campgrounds, the restaurants, the vendor booths, the concert stage, the manufacturer relationships, requires the commercial scale to remain viable. A Sturgis that returned to its 1972 character would be a Sturgis that could not afford to exist as a formal event at all. The authentic Sturgis of the 1970s already exists. It exists at smaller gatherings that operate on the same organizing principle, riders coming together under their own power because they are riders. The Born Free Show in California, the Quail Motorcycle Gathering in Carmel Valley, the Barber Vintage Festival in Alabama, the Ole Valley Antique Motorcycle Show in Pennsylvania. Events that have deliberately resisted the commercial scale that killed the authentic character of Sturgis because the people who run them understand what happened to Sturgis and chose differently. None of those events draws 500,000 people. None of them generates $800 million in economic activity. None of them has a corporate camping facility with a concert stage and a luxury RV park. And none of them has a 47-year rider living nearby who won't ride during the event because of who shows up. The transformation of Sturgis from rider gathering to commercial event did not happen uniformly. It happened through a series of specific decisions by specific entities whose financial interests were served by the transformation. The Buffalo Chip's evolution is the most documentable single thread. What Rod and Terry Woodruff built in 1981 as a $20 a night campground with a bar is today the largest private campground in the United States during its operating season. The Chip hosts headline concerts. Recent years have featured Lynyrd Skynyrd, Rob Zombie, Toby Keith, Kid Rock, at prices that require a revenue model built around premium ticket sales, camping fees, and vendor exclusivity agreements. The nightly camping rate at the Buffalo Chip in 2025 started at $189 for basic tent camping and scaled upward through luxury cabin and RV packages reaching several $100s per night. The $20 a night field where you could BYOB in 1985 is now a ticketed entertainment complex where the economic model requires extracting maximum value from each attendee. Harley-Davidson's rally presence represents the second major corporate thread. The company's demonstration rides, sponsored events, and Main Street presence at Sturgis function as an annual marketing investment in direct access to the brand's core demographic. The specific dollar value of that investment is not publicly disclosed, but the scale of infrastructure involved, demonstration fleets, staffing, signage, hospitality, represents a commitment that makes Harley-Davidson one of the largest single commercial presences at the event. The vendor exclusivity system represents the third thread. Large commercial vendors at Sturgis operate under agreements with the city and with event organizers that give established commercial interests preferential access to the highest traffic locations. The grassroots custom builder who showed up in 1972 with a trailer of parts and a card table has been progressively priced and regulated out of the most visible positions in favor of established commercial vendors who can meet the insurance, licensing, and fee requirements that the event's commercial sophistication now demands. The policing infrastructure represents the fourth thread. The 47-year rider's comment about not riding during the rally because of law enforcement density is consistent with documented complaints from long-term attendees. The event's scale requires a policing presence that the 1972 rally, 3,500 people in a city park, never needed. The specific tension between the law enforcement necessary to manage 500,000 people and the freedom from oversight culture that defined the rally's original identity is not resolvable. You cannot have both. Each of these threads, campground commercialization, manufacturer presence, vendor exclusivity, policing density, represents a rational response to the event's scale. None of them was imposed on the rally by outside forces. All of them followed naturally from the growth that the event's participants created by showing up in the numbers they showed up in. The working-class rider of the 1970s who built the event, through 3 decades of annual attendance, did not intend to create the conditions for its commercial transformation. He intended to ride to a gathering of people like himself in a place he loved. The transformation was a consequence of his success.